What? Like, who was voting on this? It has to be children, surely. It has to be children. Who was voting on this? This is ridiculous.
Today on the channel, we are going to be looking at an article that you found, Rich, on IGN. Which is, I'm just going to read it off of there so I don't get it wrong. Nintendo Voice Chat presents the best Nintendo console tournament, where they pitted off every Nintendo console ever made against each other in online votes, and kind of formulated a winner.
They did.
By popular opinion. It's an interesting concept because lots of people constantly talk about their favourite consoles and the best consoles of all time, but this seems to be a fairly definitive, if not wrong, list.
Of course. If you're asking for the general public to come to any general consensus, you're not usually going to get a good result.
No, we're not. It's democracy has failed us once again.
But I love democracy.
It was broken up into lots of brackets. There was a few consoles that were seeded.
Because obviously they were some of the systems that IGN perceived as they were such strong offerings, they would have likely have steamrolled some of the competition. So they wasn't added to the seed until they weren't seated until the second or third round. Well,
yeah.
How have you described it? They had one round and then they wasn't put into it till the second round because there are 12 consoles they've listed in total on here. They could have put a few more in. They could have made this up to 16, I think. Because there's no Game Boy Color specifically on the list.
Is it just Game Boy in general?
Yeah, they've got Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. They've not got Game Boy Color. They could have done that. They completely ignored the fact that the Nintendo 64 DD exists for some reason. That's a platform. So you could have had 16. This is what I'm saying. If you had a Game Boy Color, you could have had...
You had 12, so you'd need 4 more. So Color, DD...
Game & Watches. They've not got Game & Watches on there. Okay. And they've not got the Nintendo Pong clone from back in the day. The first ever. I think it's called Nintendo TV or something. The first ever Nintendo console. Okay. They ignored that as well. So they could have just done 16. But
what did you play on that?
What's that?
What games are on that?
What, the Nintendo TV game system?
Yeah.
Pong. I told you, it's a Pong clone.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying, but it's still a Nintendo console. So you could have had 16 on there rather than 16.
They could have stretched it
But
out.
they would have, let's be honest, all of those devices would have been steamrolled. So it depends.
Maybe the Colour.
Yeah, the colour's a weird one not to put on there, if you ask me.
That's the weirdest one.
But I guess some people argue the fact that the Game Boy Original and the Game Boy Color are actually the same console.
Essentially.
Yeah,
I suppose they are. Yeah, they've done well.
They've done okay. They've done okay in that
We're
regard.
not super upset.
No.
No.
We're just being pedantic nerds, because that's the whole point of this show, really.
It is, yes. So, I mean, what do we want to do first? Do we want to talk about the first ones and why we think that they're wrong?
So let's look at the results, shall we? We start off with round one. They put the GameCube up against the Nintendo Wii. Is that right? No, Wii U. GameCube against the Wii U.
I don't think we need to say Nintendo. They're all Nintendo.
That's a good point.
We put up the Nintendo GameCube against Nintendo Wii U.
Yeah.
Just GameCube Wii U. Okay, so the GameCube got 88% to the Wii U's 12% in this particular bracket.
Yeah, and I think that's, to be fair, a pretty predictable result based on the fact that the entire, apart from the Wii U didn't sell very well, the Wii U's library has mostly been engulfed and... Cannibarized? What would be the word there? Cannibalized. That's it. Yeah. It's been cannibalized by the Nintendo Switch. So it would be the equivalent of Sega having the Sega Saturn, it not selling as well as it did. So when the Dreamcast come out, Sega just releasing the entire Sega Saturn library again on the Dreamcast. So if people are not buying the games the first time round, find another way to make them buy the games. That's what they essentially did.
Yeah.
So they've kind of made the Wii U almost inert because there's very few games on it that haven't been ported over to the Switch.
And also, as we know, GameCube fans are fanaticists.
Yeah, so they're going to make sure that the GameCube does well in this tournament. So
and the Wii U fans don't exist.
Well, they do. They do exist. I know quite a few people, such as House of a Ted, who watches my channel. He collects Wii U games. He might even have a complete set of Wii U games.
That's impressive.
Yeah, so the Wii U does have its fandom.
Okay, so we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, I think that's quite a predictable result.
Cool. So the next bracket was the N64 versus the Wii. The N64 got 70.8% of the votes to the Wii's 29.2%. So I keep on looking over there because I've got it off screen, in case anybody notices and points it out.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so, I mean, Nintendo 64, 70.8% versus the Wii. I mean, this goes back to an argument that we've had on this channel before, on a previous video, about sales not necessarily equating to something being the best.
Exactly that. It's. I would say it's more in line with the games. Like the Wii console itself sold great, but the software library itself probably didn't do as great, nowhere close to as good as the system itself did.
There was so much shovelware on that even good games got buried in it.
Shovelware's irrelevant in this.
No, because the games get buried. You go to a game shop and there's so much there that almost the good games kind of get buried and you don't see them as much. So even the good titles on the Wii, people don't always know about.
The reason why I would say the Nintendo 64 buried the Wii in this occasion would be down to the fact that the Nintendo 64 has so many legendary games, if that makes sense. You've got the likes of Mario 64, the first true 3D, like exploratory platformer.
GoldenEye.
Exactly. The first proper console multiplayer first-person shooter.
Next one.
Ocarina of Time. It brought Zelda into a 3D environment.
Yeah, Mario Party.
Yeah, Mario Party. You did have the first Mario Party game on the system. I don't think that's that much of a relevant point, but you did have Mario Party.
It's fun.
Mario Kart 64. Again, that was very, very popular.
Yeah.
And then you've got
Pokemon Stadium.
Yeah.
Pokemon game.
Yeah, I don't think people care that much about Pokemon Stadium.
I think they do.
You've got the rare games what people really appreciate, the Banjo-Kazooies. Conker's Bad Fur Day's got a cult following, and obviously GoldenEye itself is a rare game. Diddy Kong Racing, a lot of people prefer that to Mario Kart 64. So there's a lot of top-tier legendary games there. The only ones I can think of on the Wii, really, that have that top bracket status, in fact, at all...
Wii Sports?
Yeah, it's not really, has it? People like Wii Sports, but you don't think of it in the same category as other games. The only game I would say I would put in that bracket is the Mario Galaxy games. They're literally top tier. You can't deny they're not top tier games.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everything else is kind of not
on the league of those games what we just mentioned. There is a lot of good games on the Wii. I'm not denying that, but they're not on. They're not in the abundance what the 64's got. Even though the 64's got a small library, they've got a lot of memorable titles.
They're not the 9.8 out of 10s.
No.
We really like.
No, exactly that. So next, we got the Game Boy Advance against the Virtual Boy. Who do you think won this?
Well, the Virtual Boy has got quite a good light.
Yeah. Obviously, it got devastated.
Yeah, 97% to 3%.
The only thing is, I do find this bracket a little bit unfair. A tad unfair.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because there's no chance in hell that I believe that most IGN readers, especially bearing in mind that a lot of them are probably children, have ever played a Virtual Boy. So why was it even there in the first place when hardly anyone's ever played a Virtual Boy? It wasn't released in most regions, so... It's odd that it was even there.
Yeah.
If those other ones wasn't there, like the DD, blah, 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 all the ones I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, you know why it's there? It's because it's a standalone that is completely different. It's a completely separate console. You knew it was going to get smashed. The library is appalling. It doesn't play well. It's uncomfortable.
What I'm saying is, it seems silly to put it there because hardly anyone would have played it.
No, but people wouldn't be aware of it. But it wouldn't be their own opinions that they're voting on.
No, it's like CDI. Like everyone claims to hate the CDI. I'm one of the... Do you know anyone else personally other than me who owns a CDI? No. Exactly. So why does everyone have such strong opinions on consoles they've never owned? Yeah. Most people are fucking idiots when you think about it. They just listen to people like us and formulate their opinions that way instead of actually experiencing things themselves.
Yeah. And we want the opposite of that. We want people to listen to us and then either agree or disagree. So if you disagree with any of the points that we make, seriously, throw them in the comment section below. We will do our best to answer a lot of them and we'll try and create some...
No echo chambers here, ladies and
gentlemen. We're just going to do what we want. Okay, so we kind of understand... Let's have a look at the libraries, for example. Virtual Boy doesn't really have one. The Game Boy Advance has got an amazing library. It stole games off of other things and had, advanced
We don't even need to discuss this one. That's it. It is. So the next one, we have 3DS against the DS. And
okay, this is actually quite an interesting one.
It is. Because the DS is one of the best-selling consoles of all time. It matched the PlayStation 2 in sales numbers at 155 million sales, I think.
Crazy.
So, yeah, ridiculously popular. But again, a lot of those DSs went to people who had names like Gertrude. That's half the problem to play games like Brain Training. So although those numbers were ridiculously high, a lot of people bought one, played Brain Training once, and then never touched it again. Whereas the 3DS has a really, really strong library of games in comparison to the DS.
I would agree with you.
It's my personal favourite Nintendo console of all time in terms of having a strong library. More exclusives on the 3DS, in my opinion, than any other Nintendo console. Such a amazing device. But it only beat the DS. So 3DS 62% against basically the DS's 38%. So I'm surprised that the DS did that well against the 3DS.
DS was a very popular console that people do hold a lot of nostalgia for.
But the 3DS and the DS are basically the same thing. The 3DS is compatible with the whole DS library. So the 3DS is everything what the DS has got, but better. So it's weird.
To be fair, now that you've pointed out that fact, the DS should have got 0%.
It's weird, isn't it?
It has both libraries.
It's as if a lot of people who are voting on this poll are literally children who don't even know what they are. That's how it feels like when you look at some of these results.
I had a 3DS click. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, no thought.
Yeah, it's weird like how the DS could do that well against a 3DS.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair result.
Next one, we've got one of the most popular Nintendo consoles of all time in terms of nostalgia, in terms of a library's impact.
And the Echo Chamber.
In terms of quality, Echo Chamber, everything. The Super Nintendo against the GameCube, the Nintendo console, in my opinion, with the most vocal angry fans.
This is a really interesting result, considering
how badly the GameCube actually sold.
Yeah. So the SNES got 64.2% of the vote to the GameCube's 35.8%. So the SNES won. It should have done.
Yeah, but you'd expect it to smash the GameCube because it's better than it in every imaginable way.
Yeah, again, this is a lot of people's list of the most impactful, best console of all time.
Yeah.
Like, this is up there.
Yeah, the GameCube should not be. The GameCube should not even be in the same conversation as the Super
Americans
Nintendo.
will say the NES, which is fair enough, but the Super Nintendo is amazing.
Yeah, we get to talking about the NES shortly, I guess. In fact, we get to talking about it now because the next one was the Nintendo 64. Up against the seeded NES. The Super Nintendo was seeded as well, for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And the Nintendo 64 somehow smashed the NES with 67% against the NES's 33%. Now that is a bizarre result to me.
Yeah, I mean...
that 2 in 3 people would value the Nintendo 64's significance and quality over the NES. What the fuck?
It is madness.
That's a what the fuck result to me.
It is madness. I mean, the N64 is a good console, but the library of games on it, we listed a load off. There's probably 15.
And we talked earlier about how the Nintendo 64 smashed the Wii due to cultural relevance. The top titles on there, their cultural relevance was a lot more significant than the Wii's. We've got exactly the same conversation with the NES and the Nintendo 64, but in reverse, because you've got those same franchises, but with much more iconic titles on the NES. Yeah. Super Mario Bros. On the NES is more culturally relevant than Mario 64. Legend of Zelda on the NES is more relevant than the Ocarina of Time. So to me, this is just more proof of children or young people who don't know much about gaming history voting on a poll, because the Nintendo 64, again, should not be in the same conversation as the NES. The same as I said earlier, the GameCube should not be in the same conversation as Super Nintendo. Ridiculous result.
This is one you're really passionate about.
I am, because both of those are ridiculous results. They're completely... You got to think, these must be votes from people who haven't actually played many games. Yeah, surely.
Do you know what I think the real reason is?
What's that?
I think that if the NES had a special edition Pikachu version, it might have won.
And as you know, people who've watched this channel in the past, I'm always bashing the NES on and how I feel that a lot of Americans overvalue the NES. But on this occasion, I actually side with the NES fandom and think that even considering that the Nintendo 64 is more important than that system is a joke. Yeah. It's ridiculous, actually. It's like, it's beyond the joke.
It's actually ridiculous.
It's like, what? Like, who was voting on this? But it has to be children, surely. It has to be children. Who was voting on this? It's ridiculous.
The voice goes right through the roof.
Okay, so the next one, Game Boy Advance, 75% against the original Game Boy's 25%.
Okay. You can play Game Boy games on the Game Boy Advance.
Yes.
This is the same argument that we had going back to the 3DS DS. Yeah. Anybody that knew that should immediately have voted for the Game Boy Advance, just knowing that.
And the Game Boy Advance was amazing, especially when you consider that you had the Game Boy Advance SP as well, what had the front-lit screen. Yeah. And you could charge it. You didn't need batteries anymore. That was amazing. So the Game Boy Advance was spectacular because not only did you get a huge upgrade from the 8-bit Game Boy to a 32-bit Game Boy Advance, but apart from that as well, you would basically get updated version of Super Nintendo games.
Yep.
You got access on the go to one of the greatest libraries of all time. The Game Boy Advance was amazing.
Yeah, just so you know, because I'm not sure we pointed this out, 75.1% for the Game Boy Advance compared to 24.9% for the original.
And I think that's completely fair. The Game Boy original, when it came out at the time, was dated on arrival. It was produced to be a budget system, what you could buy for cheap with a monochrome screen, and it was good. It was good. I really enjoyed the Game Boy, but I think I enjoyed the Game Boy Advance more. And I could play my Game Boy games on the Game Boy Advance anyway, so it was win-win-win.
Yeah, and that's even including the fact that the Game Boy has the colour link and the pocket
and
the micro all linked into that.
Yeah,
It's all in one bracket.
perfectly good result to me.
Including all of that as well.
Next one, I think this is a totally ridiculous result, like completely ridiculous.
This is
maybe the most ridiculous out of all the results.
Yeah, this is the one you get the most angry about, which is
stupid.
Really interesting.
It's a really stupid one.
So, this is the Nintendo Switch versus the 3DS. I keep on saying Nintendo. I told you off for that.
Yeah.
91.2% said Switch, leaving the 3DS with 8.8%.
Which is ridiculous because the 3DS is so great. So people own the 3DS. So you'd imagine they experienced the library. But again, this is again one of those cases I've just got to put down to no, the children are wrong. Again,
this is a really weird one because there is an argument for the Switch as far as the fact that it's both a handheld, just about, and a home console. Like, that's a great thing, whereas 3DS was only handheld.
The problem is, though, like I said, the 3DS has a vast amount of high-quality exclusives up there with the Super Nintendo in terms of what you can get on it. It is a broad, vast library of games you can only experience on that system, especially due to the dual screen feature as well.
Yeah.
The games were made bespoke for it. With the Switch, on the other hand, whilst I think it's an inferior handheld, it's got terrible battery life. It suffers from that horrible Joy-Con drift.
It's a little bit too big to fit into a pocket.
It feels flimsy in your hands because it's in 3 parts. I just don't like the Switch form factor in general. Like, it's neither the perfect console or is it the perfect handheld because it's a hybrid. So that obviously, for me, that's why I'm not a huge fan of that device. But then when you look at the library of games on the Switch, although it does have a lot of decent exclusives, a huge chunk of the system's library you can also just get on the PlayStation 4 or Steam anyway, or even the Wii U. So it's a system that's full of games what you can get on other hardware, and the 3DS didn't have that. So for it to actually batter the 3DS in that capacity again seems odd. I think that's very strange.
Yeah, it's...
I wouldn't expect it to win because I understand the Switch's popularity, but I wouldn't expect that much of a landslide.
Yeah, it'd literally be like putting Tyson Fury up against like your child in a boxing match. That's how much he got battered.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe that it got battered that badly. Again, is it just ignorance and not enough people have played the 3DS to value it?
People love the Switch. They've got like... The Switch can do no wrong, almost.
But that's how I felt about the 3DS. It was so strong. I had never played a system since the Super Nintendo that I felt with a library as good as the 3DS.
Yeah.
There's so many greats on it.
Okay, so what we're actually saying here is that the Switch versus 3DS is completely unfair. It's the one that should not have gone the way that it did.
Well, I guess it's one of those things where you've got to put the systems up against each other eventually. But I do think it's ridiculous that... 9 in 10 people chose the Switch to have a better library than the 3DS, which I personally don't think that's close to being true. They're at least equal, but I would put the 3DS a lot higher. I think it's more of a case of, because the 3DS is a last-gen system, it doesn't have that cool factor.
Yeah.
Like, people like the GameCube now because it's old. I will never call it retro. It's not retro. It's old.
Okay.
And because the 3DS is only considered old at the moment, that's why...
okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I love the Switch. I really do. I love my Switch. I think it's brilliant, but I can certainly see your points and, closer to even.
Yeah, I'm happy for the Switch to defeat the 3DS, but I wouldn't expect it to steamroll it that horrendously. Like,
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's all I can say. Like, the 3DS deserves more respect than that.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so, next bracket. We're coming into the winners now. We don't have to go over these quite so much, but... We have the Super Nintendo versus the N64. SNES won 60-40.
Again, I feel like the Nintendo 64 should not have got that many votes. That's ludicrous.
Yeah, that's absolutely
for it to get 40% of the votes against the Super Nintendo.
Yeah. Literally one of the best systems ever made.
Against a system that lost in the console wars significantly.
And has 15 good games.
I think it's got more than 15.
No, it hasn't. We've counted them. 15 is what we got to. 15 games.
15 legendary games. Maybe. We won't do the exact numbers, but we know
this is another video.
We know the Super Nintendo has a lot more better games than that.
Yeah. If you want to see that video where we bash the N64 into oblivion,
we can.
Let us know. Comment.
Yeah.
Okay. Next is the Switch versus the Game Boy Advance. 86.9% Switch, 13.1% GBA. Again, this is a bit of a strange one because the GBA's got a really good library. Plus, it's got all the library from before.
That's weird, actually. This is exactly what I meant, by the way, when I talked about having like old cool factors. And this is what I'm saying. Because the GBA is older than the 3DS, it fared better against the Switch. Only slightly better, but it still fared better.
Yeah, it does.
And I think that the 3DS, again, is a much, much better system than the GBA. The GBA is cool, but the 3DS is much better. But a lot of the GBA games, as I said, were like enhanced ports of Super Nintendo games.
Yeah.
You've got its exclusives, but the 3DS has a lot better exclusives than the GBA. So
yeah, neither console has Plock though.
Again, I don't think that the GBA should have been obliterated that badly by the Switch, but it shouldn't have done better against it than the 3DS.
If I was gonna, I'd say maybe 25 to 75, maybe Switch GBA.
They could have done some more interesting brackets, to be fair. I would have really liked to have seen how the 3DS would have done if it had been put up directly against the GBA.
Yeah, that would have been fun. Interesting.
But by looking at this stats, it would suggest that in all likelihood the GBA would have won.
Yeah, which
I disagree with.
No. Okay, and this is the final round. So this is going for all the marbles, as I would have said if I was in the 40s. 40s?
Who cares?
Some of that. Okay, so we have the Super Nintendo versus the Switch. So, drum roll. I could have added that in post.
Okay, well, we don't need to now.
Okay.
Saving the work.
Yeah, Super Nintendo, 60% to the Switch, 40%. So the SNES overall won. I think that result is fair.
Fairly fair. Well, it was fair if people actually voted. I guess you can't complain about that.
But I think that, like, even with a slightly more depth analysis than maybe the average Joe, I think that's still quite a fair winner.
I would say that if someone said to me, what is the greatest Nintendo console of all time, I would say Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I would, yes.
That is what I would say. But if someone asked what's my favourite Nintendo system of all time, I would say 3DS.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's my favourite, because again, it's just library strength. I think that's all it comes down to. You want a Nintendo console with as many good exclusives as possible. You buy Nintendo consoles to play Nintendo exclusives.
Yeah,
that's the whole reason.
Yeah.
But in the Super Nintendo era, you didn't even need to do that. You just bought it because it was the system with the best games on. Which the Super Nintendo offered both of those things.
Yeah.
It offered the best games of a generation, in my humble opinion, and it offered the most Nintendo exclusives. It was both.
Yeah. I think the SNES is a really fair winner.
And you can't say the same for the Switch so much. Like, I think most people wouldn't try and claim the Switch has a better library than the PS4, would they? Or Steam.
I've said it before, and I've said it again. I can't play my SNES on the toilet.
That's true. Actually, you can, using the Nintendo Switch!
I can, now. Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly the reason why. I can play my Super Nintendo games on the toilet, but only on my Nintendo Switch, which I think is probably why it did so well.
I think it's partially... There's a few reasons it's done that well. Firstly, the fact that people tend to believe that the moment they're living in time is more significant than it actually is.
Yes.
That's a human trait generally. Like, you always believe the now is more important than the past. Well, it usually is. But then when the now becomes the past and you look back at it, you go, oh, that wasn't that good as what it was. Well, such as, for example, when the Nintendo 64 was in its prime, it did at points feel like you was playing a lot more of a significant console than it actually turned out to be.
Agreed.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And I don't feel like the Switch is going to be quite like that because the Switch has sold as well as it has. But for me, the Switch just doesn't have the same character as other systems have because a lot of the big games in the end was just ports from the previous generation. It was the first... It wasn't so much
nobody noticed because nobody had the previous generation.
Yeah, but I did. So that was a big issue for me. I already had a lot of the first Nintendo Switch games because I loved the Wii U. At the time, I did love the Wii U.
Yeah.
And then you've got the fact that a lot of the games are ports from other hardware, such as the PlayStation 4. But if you play the version of a Switch, it doesn't run as well on the PlayStation 4.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, looking back at some of these results, and you said how it would be nice to see certain things go up against different things. I think that the one that I would like to see the most would be Switch versus Wii U.
that would have been another 97 to 3%.
I think it would have been funny to see that.
But in all seriousness, the problem with the Switch for me is it has as many drawbacks as it has advantages, which you'd expect. It's a hybrid console.
Yeah.
It's a home console and a handheld in one, which means it doesn't offer the best of both worlds. It offers some of the benefits of both worlds, and for me, that's why I will never love the Switch as much as other people.
I'll tell you what, I get it. Yeah, I think that's completely fair. So now we want to know what you thought of some of these epic battles that IGN have come up with, or whoever it is that actually did this.
Yeah. It was fun to talk about, I'll give them that.
Yeah, it was interesting, at the very least. So we want to know whether you were as interested as we were.
And do you think the Super Nintendo deserved to be victorious? And do you think that the Nintendo Switch should have done as well as it did? Do you know what it feels like? Like the Nintendo Switch is the Roman Reigns of game consoles. Did you get what I mean?
Yeah. Annoyingly, yes. Yeah.
And so, you can make up your minds.
Yeah. Is it what I meant by that? It's going to have a good heel turn soon. Yeah. But yeah, thank you all for watching this video. If you want to see any of our other content, go back through our backlog. It's not terrible.
Yeah, we've got a lot of new content. Watch the new ones. The new ones are better, I think. But that could be living in the now.
Yeah, and they're definitely monetized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but thank you.
Cheerio.